Not every hero wears a lab coat or even holds a medical degree. In a time of war, secrecy, and scientific desperation, a little-known Chinese scientist turned to a 1600s-year-old herbal manuscript and pulled from it a cure that would save over 3 million lives and counting. Her name, Tu Youyou, and the world had never heard of her until it couldn't ignore her anymore. The microscope didn't lead to her discovery. The dusty pages of ancient Chinese herbal lore did. At a moment when modern medicine was failing, she dared to look backward to traditional wisdom and found a path forward. This is a story not only of science, but of quiet determination, overlooked talent, and a single leaf that changed everything. By the 1960s, malaria had become a silent war with no front lines and no mercy. It crept through humid jungles, rural villages, and military camps across Asia, Africa, and South America. The parasite responsible, Plasmodium falciparum, was evolving faster than medicine could keep up. Drugs like quinine and chloroquine, once hailed as miracle cures, had begun to fail at alarming rates. Patients who should have recovered fell into fevered delirium instead, their blood overwhelmed by parasites that shrugged off the drugs meant to destroy them. In southern China, and along the sweltering jungles near the Vietnam border, malaria wasn't just a health crisis, it was a military threat. Soldiers patrolling mosquito-infested zones were falling faster from disease than from combat. Entire units were weakened, their strength eroded by recurring fevers. Resistant strains of malaria were tearing through communities, crippling agricultural productivity and deepening poverty. The enemy wasn't visible, but it was winning. In 1967, faced with growing losses both at home and among allied North Vietnamese forces, the Chinese government launched a secret mission under direct military oversight. It was known simply as Project 523, named for its founding date, May 23. Its objective: discover a completely new anti-malarial drug. The directive was urgent, nationalistic, and confidential. Scientists from across China were mobilized. Failure was not an option, nor was publicity. Tu Youyou, then a researcher at the Academy of Traditional Chinese Medicine, was not initially a leading figure. She held no doctoral degree, she had not studied abroad. She was not from a renowned scientific family, but she was different. She straddled two worlds, Western pharmacology and traditional Chinese healing. While others saw a divide, she saw a bridge, and Project 523 would soon need a bridge more than anything. The early stages of Project 523 were marked by relentless frustration. Hundreds of synthetic compounds were screened. Thousands of herbal remedies were tested, most without success. Some produced mild effects, others none at all. Many promising extracts proved toxic. Every failure meant another life lost to the parasite. Every delay deepened the urgency. When Tuesday was appointed head of a new anti-malarial research group in 1969, she approached the problem differently. Instead of limiting the focus to modern drug models, she asked a radical question. What if the cure had already been discovered centuries ago, just not extracted correctly? This thinking was not mainstream. In a scientific environment increasingly pressured to modernize, turning back to ancient medical texts could be seen as regressive or even foolish. But Tuesday was not hunting for superstition. She was searching for leads. She believed that within the vast records of traditional Chinese medicine records, based on thousands of years of human trial and survival, there might be patterns, insights, or forgotten details worth re-examining with modern tools. Malaria was evolving rapidly, and time was short. Death tolls mounted. Hospitals overflowed with shivering patients soaked in sweat, locked in cycles of chills, fever, and exhaustion. Somewhere in the feverish silence between life and death, there had to be an answer. Tuesday, you intended to find it. In the dusty archives of traditional Chinese medicine, there are over 2,000 years of recorded observations, recipes, case studies, rituals, and remedies, painstakingly passed down through generations. To many modern scientists, These manuscripts were the relics of a pre-scientific age, better suited for cultural preservation than clinical application. But Tuesday, Youyou saw them differently. She didn't see superstition. She saw untapped data. Woven within those fragile scrolls and faded ink was the trial and error wisdom of millions of patients across centuries. And one ancient phrase would soon change the course of medical history. Working late nights by oil lamp and magnifying glass, Tuesday and her small team sifted through hundreds of herbal records, cross-referencing each one with malaria symptoms. Fevers that came and went, chills that rattled bones, skin yellowed by infection. One ancient medical text caught her attention, a 4th century manual titled Zhouhou Beiji Fang, or Emergency Prescriptions, kept up one sleeve. The author was Ji Hong, a physician, alchemist from the Eastern Jin dynasty. His remedies were known for their precision, not poetry. There, among the inked pages, Tuesday found a passage describing the treatment of intermittent fevers using an herb called Qinghao Artemisia annua, or sweet wormwood. It wasn't a new discovery. Qinghao had been used in folk remedies for centuries. But what stood out to Tuesday wasn't just the herb, it was the method. The text advised to soak the leaves in cold water and wring out the juice, rather than boiling them. To most, that would seem like a minor detail. But to Tuesday, it was a flashing red light. Her scientific training told her that heat could easily degrade delicate organic compounds. If boiling Qinghao destroyed its antimalarial properties, that could explain the inconsistent results many researchers were seeing. Modern labs were applying heat-based extraction methods out of habit. Ji Hong, writing 16 centuries earlier, had unknowingly offered a critical correction. Tuesday and her team immediately changed course. They began using low-temperature solvents, experimenting with cold ether extractions. The results were dramatic. Crude extracts of Qinghao showed significantly higher antimalarial activity first in lab cultures, then in infected mice. It wasn't just a marginal improvement. The parasite load in the animal's blood dropped to nearly zero. In some cases, the infection vanished entirely. Excitement pulsed through Tuesday's small laboratory, but it was tempered by caution. Centuries-old manuscripts and ether extractions weren't a victory yet. They were a signal that the past might just hold the answer the present so desperately needed. While other researchers in Project 523 continued testing hundreds of herbs with limited success, Tuesday's team focused obsessively on refining the Qinghao extract. Each batch was recorded, catalogued, and tested again. Days turned into months. The process was grueling and often repetitive, but the data kept confirming one thing: this herb, extracted carefully at low temperatures, had the power to kill malaria in a way modern drugs could not. Tuesday Youyou had found a whisper of hope in a 1600-year-old sentence, and she wasn't letting go. In most labs, deviations from protocol are frowned upon, but in Tuesday Youyou's lab, they became the key to survival. By the early 1970s, Tuesday's team had refined their low-temperature extraction technique for Qinghao, producing a clear, yellow crystalline substance. It wasn't just working, it was outperforming nearly every known antimalarial compound in laboratory tests. Infected mice and monkeys, lethargic and near death, were making full recoveries. The extract not only killed the malaria parasite, it did so rapidly, without the toxicity seen in earlier attempts. The evidence was overwhelming. They had found something special. But this success brought a new, more dangerous question. What about humans? In a country under political upheaval, with limited communication, and virtually no international scientific collaboration, Tuesday couldn't simply publish her findings or request peer review. Testing on humans, especially with a compound derived from an ancient herb and an improvised extraction method, was fraught with ethical and personal risk. There were no institutional review boards. There were no elaborate pharmaceutical safety protocols. There was only the problem and the urgency to solve it. So Tuesday did something few scientists would dare. She took the extract herself. It wasn't a reckless decision. It was calculated, cautious, and deeply personal. Before Tuesday would ever ask a patient to take her formulation, she needed to be sure it wouldn't cause harm. She and her colleagues ingested the first doses of artemisinin themselves, knowing full well that if there were side effects, liver failure, neurological toxicity, allergic reaction, there would be no safety net. But none came. No adverse symptoms, no reactions. Just a quiet breath of relief. With this informal safety trial behind them, Tuesday moved forward to the next step, treating real patients. In a malaria ward in Hainan Province, southern China, Tuesday and her team administered the extract to 30 patients suffering from advanced, drug-resistant malaria. Most had tried and failed to respond to chloroquine. Their bodies were ravaged, their immune systems exhausted. In many cases, Tuesday's extract was the final attempt before death. The results were immediate and astonishing. Within hours, fevers dropped, parasite levels in the blood plummeted. Within a few days, patients who had been near death were sitting up in bed, speaking, even laughing. It wasn't just remission, it was clearance. Artemisinin was doing what no other drug had done. But there were no headlines, no journal features, no international medical conferences. Just quiet notes in a ledger, and a team of scientists working out of borrowed labs and dimly lit offices. While the rest of the world searched desperately for a cure, Tuesday's tiny team in Beijing had already found it by breaking rules, rethinking methods, and trusting instincts few others had. This was not the moment for glory. This was the moment to keep going. They had discovered a miracle hidden in a leaf. Now they had to prove it to a world that wasn't yet listening. In the sterile silence of a hospital ward in southern China, 30 malaria patients lay curled beneath damp sheets, their skin clammy, their eyes dull. For most, this wasn't their first fever. The disease had a cruel rhythm, rising with a chill, cresting with a burning fever, and crashing into sweats and weakness. Then it would start again. The patients had tried chloroquine, quinine, herbal decoctions, and prayers. Nothing worked. Their blood teemed with Plasmodium, falciparum, and time was running out. Tuesday, you entered this ward without fanfare. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. She didn't even hold a doctoral degree. But in her small briefcase, she carried something extraordinary. Artemisinin, a clear crystalline compound extracted from Qinghao, using a method inspired by a 1,600-year-old text and refined with modern chemistry. She wasn't there to experiment recklessly. She was there to save lives. The first doses were administered with extreme care. Doctors monitored vital signs by the hour. Blood samples were taken before and after treatment. And then, quietly, something began to change. Within hours of the first dose, fevers subsided. Within days, the malaria parasites vanished from blood smears. These weren't partial recoveries or flukes. These were clean breaks from a disease that had haunted humanity for millennia. 30 patients, near death, were brought back by a compound discovered not in a modern lab, but in a leaf and in the mind of a scientist who had refused to give up. But Tuesday didn't stop there. She knew the burden of proof was heavy, and anecdotal success wouldn't convince the world. She traveled to other provinces where malaria raged. She oversaw additional clinical trials. She refined dosage protocols, improved the purification process, and meticulously documented every result. Her team created derivatives of artemisinin compounds like dihydroartemisinin that were more stable and easier to administer. The goal wasn't just to treat malaria. It was to eliminate it. And still, she remained in the shadows. In most scientific revolutions, names rise quickly. Press releases, accolades, book deals. But Tu Youyou's revolution unfolded in quiet, cloistered corners of a country ravaged by political turmoil. Her research was considered state property. Her name was scrubbed from early papers. Even among her peers, few knew the depth of her contribution. The Cultural Revolution had made self-promotion dangerous. Humility was survival. Tuesday didn't complain. She didn't ask for credit. She kept working. She kept visiting clinics. She kept saving lives. And when foreign scientists eventually heard rumors of a mysterious compound in China that could cure resistant malaria, they were skeptical. Who had developed it? Where was the data? What journal had it been published in? There were no easy answers. Only a woman with no medical degree, no international recognition, and no interest in glory who had risked her own life to prove a cure, and never once asked to be seen as a hero. Artemisinin was a miracle. There was no doubt anymore. From village clinics in Yunnan to military hospitals in Hainan, Tu Youyou's compound had done what generations of medicine had failed to achieve. It stopped malaria in its tracks, and not just in early stages, but in patients already ravaged by the parasite. Those who had failed every other treatment, resistance didn't matter. Fever cycles ended, lives were saved. In any other time, in any other place, the world would have roared with recognition. But this was China in the 1970s, during the height of the Cultural Revolution. And the rules were different here. Science, like everything else, was governed by ideology. Self-promotion was considered bourgeois. Individual achievement was discouraged. There were no press conferences, no celebrations, no international journal submissions. Even within Project 523, the discovery of artemisinin was treated not as a singular achievement by Tu Youyou, but as the anonymous outcome of collective effort. The few internal reports that did mention her were vague, and most early papers omitted her name entirely. She didn't push back, not because she didn't care, but because she understood the stakes. Recognition could come later, if at all. What mattered now was the medicine. The compound worked. The protocols were replicable. Artemisinin had been found, and yet, outside of China, the world remained unaware. For years, as millions continued to suffer from drug-resistant malaria across Southeast Asia and Africa, the cure sat quietly behind political walls. Even international agencies like the World Health Organization had no access to the full data. Rumors trickled out of a mysterious plant compound tested in China of near-miraculous recoveries, but without peer-reviewed publications or international collaborations, few in the global scientific community took it seriously. By the time Chinese scientists finally presented their findings abroad in the late 1970s and early 80s, skepticism ran deep. Could such a significant breakthrough really come from a developing nation still recovering from internal chaos? Western scientists demanded validation. Only after years of further trials, republication, and international verification did the full scope of artemisinin's power begin to be recognized. And even then, Tu Youyou's name remained largely unknown. She watched quietly as pharmaceutical companies across the world began manufacturing artemisinin-based treatments. Her compound, once wrung from soaked leaves in a backroom lab, became the foundation of new global antimalarial strategies. The treatment she pioneered would eventually be credited with saving millions of lives. Yet she returned each day to her modest office, her work continuing without fanfare. When asked decades later how she felt about being overlooked for so long, Tuesday responded with characteristic humility, "I do not want fame. I just want to see this medicine used to save lives." But history doesn't always forget. Recognition, long denied, was slowly making its way toward the woman who had found a cure by listening to a whisper from the past and holding on to it, even when the world refused to hear. Tuesday, Youyou never expected a thank you. She had worked in silence, in secrecy, in service to a mission that demanded everything and offered little in return. She didn't seek awards, didn't speak to reporters, and didn't lobby for authorship on scientific papers. For decades, the world's most powerful antimalarial treatment bore no trace of her name, but as the tide of history shifted, silence could no longer contain her story. By the 1992, the global malaria crisis had reached a new level of urgency. Resistance to older medications had spread far beyond Asia. In Africa, the heart of the epidemic, children were dying at staggering rates. International health organizations were desperate for new treatments. And finally, they began to take notice of the compound that had been quietly saving lives in China, artemisinin. Clinical trials were conducted around the world. The results were undeniable. Artemisinin and its derivatives worked faster, with fewer side effects, and with unparalleled effectiveness against drug-resistant strains. The World Health Organization endorsed it as the gold standard for malaria treatment, and artemisinin-based combination therapies ACTs became the frontline defense in the battle against the disease. And still, few people outside of China knew who had discovered it. That began to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. In 2011, Tu Youyou was awarded the Lasker DeBakey Clinical Medical Research Award, often called America's Nobel. For the first time, her name was spoken alongside the world's great medical pioneers. The scientific community, long skeptical of work done behind the walls of communist China, now opened its eyes to the quiet woman who had changed the course of medicine. Then, in 2015, came the moment no one, least of all Tuesday herself, had expected. The Nobel Committee announced that Tu Youyou would receive the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her discoveries concerning a novel therapy against malaria. She was 84 years old, the first Chinese citizen to win a Nobel in any scientific field. She shared the prize with two other researchers who had developed parasite-related treatments. But the focus was clear. Tuesday's discovery had saved millions. In her acceptance speech in Stockholm, Tuesday stood beneath the Golden Nobel insignia, not as a polished academic or media personality, but as a modest scientist in a simple dress. Her voice steady, her words spare. She spoke not of politics or pride, but of gratitude to the ancient texts that guided her, to the team who followed her lead, and to the patients whose recoveries had validated her life's work. The applause was thunderous, but Tuesday remained unchanged. Back in China, she returned to her quiet apartment and resumed her daily routines. No lavish celebrations, no grand tours. She resumed her research, advising young scientists, and continuing to study the mechanisms of malaria resistance. For Tuesday, Youyou recognition was never the goal. But at last, the world knew the name of the woman who had listened to ancient leaves and given life to millions. For centuries, malaria had stalked the world's most vulnerable, the child in a mosquito-filled hut, the pregnant woman with a weakened immune system, the soldier trudging through tropical heat. It was ancient, ruthless, and adaptable. But thanks to Tuesday Youyou's discovery of artemisinin, the balance finally shifted. By the early 2000s, artemisinin-based combination therapies, ACTs, had become the primary tool in the global fight against malaria. ACTs worked fast. Within 48 hours, most patients were free of parasites. Mortality rates dropped dramatically. In sub-Saharan Africa, where malaria had killed more than 400,000 people annually, mostly children, those numbers began to fall. Entire villages that once buried their young during the rainy season now thrived. Parents saw their children survive. Schools stayed open. Economies grew stronger. The World Health Organization estimates that over 3 million lives have been saved thanks to artemisinin. And yet, Tuesday Youyou's work was never just about one compound. It was about how she found it. She didn't stumble upon artemisinin in a high-tech lab or by accident. She uncovered it by asking unconventional questions, by returning to forgotten knowledge, by listening to voices from the past that others had dismissed. In the world of modern science driven by metrics, patents, and prestige, Tuesday's approach was almost radical. She proved that the future of medicine didn't always lie in creating something new, but in seeing something old with fresh eyes. Today, scientists battling emerging diseases look to her methodology as much as her medicine. Her success reignited global interest in ethnopharmacology, the study of traditional medicines using modern techniques. Herbal libraries, once dismissed as superstition, are now considered valuable resources. Pharmaceutical companies have begun investing in the digitization of ancient manuscripts, searching them for clues, just as Tuesday once did. Her legacy opened a door to collaboration between modern biochemistry and centuries old wisdom. But malaria has not surrendered. In parts of Southeast Asia, early signs of artemisinin resistance have begun to emerge. The parasite, as always, adapts. It learns, and so must we. Scientists today are exploring next generation therapies, longer, lasting compounds, triple drug combinations, even vaccines. But Tuesday's blueprint remains relevant. Her belief in curiosity, humility, and interdisciplinary thinking is being applied to new problems: cancer, autoimmune diseases, viral infections. The question isn't just, what can we discover, but what have we overlooked? Tu Youyou continues to inspire new generations of researchers, especially women in science. In a field where female voices are still underrepresented, her journey from an overlooked researcher in Maoist China to a Nobel laureate stands as a reminder that brilliance is not bound by credentials, titles, or borders. She is not just a scientist. She is proof that quiet persistence can shake the world. As we prepare for the next wave of global health challenges, the story of artemisinin reminds us. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is a single leaf, and the courage to believe in it. When Tu Youyou didn't invent artemisinin, she rediscovered it. She unearthed it from brittle pages, trusted the forgotten voices of ancient doctors, and turned a centuries-old remedy into modern salvation. In a time of turmoil, with no fame, no funding, and no formal medical degree, she chose to believe in the power of simplicity, of observation, of patience. Her method was unconventional, her recognition delayed, but her impact undeniable. More than 3 million lives, and counting, owe their existence to her quiet determination. Tuesday's story is not just a medical breakthrough, it's a human one. It reminds us that wisdom isn't always loud, that heroism doesn't demand a spotlight. It whispers that the answers to the future may lie in the pages of the past, waiting for someone to listen differently. She showed the world that science and tradition are not enemies but partners. And though she asked for no reward, her name is now etched into the annals of medicine, beside the millions of children saved by a medicine born of leaves and belief. Today, when the wind rustles through the fields of Qinghao, it carries more than the scent of wormwood. It carries the echo of Tu Youyou,